Hello and welcome back to AP World History Modern. Today we are on our second day of the Haitian Revolution inside Unit 5.2, right? And this is our day 7 on 5.2. So just running the kind of overview of the Haitian Revolution because in your breakdown from the activities from yesterday, you should have a very nice detailed analysis. Something I'm going to make available to you on Google Classroom is I will share. I'll show you a link to this as well. So just an article about the Haitian Revolution, and how it is depicted in Western sources. Okay, and I'll also share this as well. This is a graphic novel that I came across that looks at. It gives you just a quick little overview of it, right? A nice simple overview of the revolution and its start, and and give you some background here. So it's All right, so looking at this, it is, you kind of see who it was created by, and right. So I'll make that available to you on Google Classroom. Okay. All right. So once again, this is our kind of basic contextualization in which the Haitian Revolution has taken part in. All right, and I guess I'll, at some point, kind of go through and do some answers. So actually, let me kind of do that now. Let me just start by going over the answers for the timeline, because I don't think I have that there. Yeah, so let me pull up the answers for the timeline to see how you did, see how yours matches up. So actually, I got it right here. So for your phase 1, right, this is what it should look like. Phase 2, right? For your phase 2, these are roughly what you should have, or something similar to this. From watching that film. All right, so feel free to pause and look. For phase 3, this is what your answers roughly should look like. Okay. And then lastly, for phase 4, right, this is what your information should largely look like. Okay, so those are the answers I'm going to be looking for, or the ideas I'm going to be looking for in class, right, when you bring those in. Okay, all right, so that's that. All right, that is that. All right, so let's kind of just run through and just do some overview stuff, just things, fill in some blanks. From what you would have gotten from that, from that timeline. Right, so the kind of things that are being produced, where Haiti is situated, or Saint Domingue is situated within the colonial context of the French, right? In spite of everything else going on, you can see what Saint Domingue or Haiti, I guess I'll just call it Haiti, what Haiti was known for producing, right? So coffee, sugarcane, right? Produced more coffee than sugar, or coffee and sugar than all the British West Indies combined. So an extremely profitable colony, right? And of course, there's going to be a tremendous human cost there as well. So 1/3 of all transatlantic slaves brought across the Atlantic, from 1783 to 91. All right, so during that period, you can definitely see a huge human toll. And of course, remember there's that connection to Vundun, so that syncretism that happens between West African religions and Roman Catholicism in the colonies, right? And of course, we're talking about the western portion of the island of Hispaniola, right? I learned just the other day that during this time period, you're also going to see an attempt by the Spanish to reassert full control over the eastern half of the island of Hispaniola. you know, and there's going to be a revolt against that as well there. So, little Dominican Revolution, but we don't cover that in our class, not in our standards, for whatever reason. All right, so just a little bit more contextualization, right? So in this, we had actually already talked about this before when we were dealing with absolutism and our land-based empires in the legal codes of Louis XIV, right? So we have the Code Noir, right? So this is the French legal code for the regulation of slavery in the West Indies, right? In the Caribbean itself. Right, so just give you an idea of what kind of laws we're talking about, right, and a few more. Okay, so with this being our context, here we go. You're welcome to pause on these and go ahead and read through these. I think I got a repeat there. Remember when we talk about the revolution, right? The whole Duddy, right? Duddy Bookman. The second phase, or the second stage of the French Revolution, begins as a maroon Vundun ceremony. Okay, so there's that Vundun connection. Once again, making sure that we have that connection between what was going on in the National Assembly and the French Revolution, the ideals being expressed, and the attempt to apply those ideals in Haiti. All right, so we have our passage. Let's meet, plan a revolt. All right, so that begins the second stage, right, of the revolution. All right, and we have, and of course, there's this, how could you source this quote, right? So in class, we would definitely attempt to do this. All right, so feel free to do that via email if you're distance learning. All right, so once again, you're free to stop and read through this. This is just giving you some additional evidence. Okay. All right, and I am going to move on. 1795 French Constitution. Toussaint. Okay. Okay. All right, next slide. All right, and next slide. And next slide. This is something that we definitely talked about in class regarding the American Revolution when we started talking about, when we looked at the debt that was accrued after the American Revolution and who accrued that debt, right? So, why does the United States owe France, Spain, the Dutch? Why do we owe them money? They definitely were there to support any effort against the British, just like the British are there to support any effort against the French. All right, so Dessalines and Toussaint. All right, so this is just something I kind of threw together for that human-environment interaction connection for you. All right, so from 1793 to 98, case fatality rates among British troops in the West Indies, including Saint Domingue, was as high as 70%. Right, a worse fate befell newly arrived French armed forces in 1802. Right, so that was sent by Napoleon to reestablish slavery. So Napoleon's initial dispatch nearly 30,000 soldiers and sailors to the island. Evidence suggests the troops were actually an expeditionary force with the intention to invade North America through New Orleans. Because they wanted to establish a major foothold in the Mississippi Valley. Lacking knowledge, basic provisions, control measures, mortality from the disease left only a small shattered fraction of troops left, and those numbers are actually in your timeline. I think it's like 6,000. I'll go back and check them in a minute. right? So this is because of yellow fever, right? As a result of yellow fever. Napoleon is unable to secure Saint Domingue for slavery again, and then obviously, completely ill-equipped to establish a military foothold in North America. Possibly causing a confrontation with the United States, and deal with what's going on in Europe. So as a result of that, he abandons this plan and eventually sells this to Jefferson, right, to the United States. All right, and we in class we may or may not do an SAQ on this, or just try to source it. All right, why is the Haitian role portrayed and perceived in the United States and Europe? All right, this is definitely something we kind of break down our Strayer homework. What Strayer says about this and what the evidence there says. All right, and this is of course, a secondary source on this issue, right? So Jefferson, this is referring to Thomas Jefferson, right? President Jefferson was terrified of what was happening in Saint Domingue. He refers to Toussaint's army as cannibals. His fear was that Black American would be inspired by what they saw taking place just off the shores of America, and he spent his entire career trying to shut down any contact and therefore any movement of information between the American mainland and the Caribbean island. He called upon Congress to abolish trade between the United States after 1804. Right, was an independent country of Haiti. He argued that French believed it was still owned, right? Believed it still owned the island, and then you saw how that went in your timeline, by the way. In short, he denied the Haitian revolutionaries had the same right to independence and autonomy that he claimed for American patriots. Consequently, in 1805 and finally 1806, trade was formally shut down between the United States and Haiti, which decimated the already very weak Haitian economy. And of course, Jefferson then argued that this was an example of what happens when Africans are allowed to govern themselves. Economic devastation caused in large part by its own economic policies. That's a pretty damning portrayal of Jefferson there. All right, so big takeaways here. And before we kind of get into that, I guess let me jump in and just look at the actual effects here, because I said I'd look at this. Yellow fever, right? So it kills Leclerc, right? So our French leaders, Napoleon's brother-in-law here, and it kills 24,000 French soldiers, immobilizes, hospitalizes 8,000 more, leaving only 8,000 left, right? So completely decimating French forces. One other little thing about this timeline that always kind of freaks me out or bothers me, when you look at Vincent Oge, like what was he actually fighting for? He's fighting to give men of color who own land the right to vote, right? So that's what he's fighting for, and he gets executed for that in February of 1791, right? 1791. So then the question becomes how long does it take before what he was actually fighting for is actually granted? By April of 92, so literally a year and 2 months later, right? Full citizenship is given to all people of color. So not only what Oge had been fighting for, but way beyond what he had been fighting for is won a year and 2 months later. I mean, so just, imagine being executed, fighting for something that 2 months over a year later is going to be granted. Plus, that always kind of strikes me as, an especially sad thing. All right, let's wrap it up. So debrief. All right, French Revolution leads to the Haitian Revolution. Haitian, obviously, American and French are all gonna inspire the later Latin American revolutions, right? And I had a little bit more of an in-depth debrief last time, but so I don't need to rehash all that. Okay, all right, that's it for today. Sapriati.